A single peasant living through the actual Middle Ages watched their world change more in one lifetime than most fantasy empires manage in 3,000 years. That sounds backward, I know. We picture the medieval past as one long grey stretch where nothing moved. But real people back then lived through new tools their parents never touched and plagues that rewrote who held power. The invented worlds we love did the opposite. They picked a look and welded the clock in place. And yeah, that frozen calm can feel wonderful on the page. The trouble starts the moment you realize almost none of those worlds ever actually chose it. And that one word, chose, is what I want to stay on for a second, because it's carrying more than it looks like. When a writer actually chooses a world's tech level, they've weighed something and landed on an answer. When they don't choose it, they inherit it. You open the document, you picture a fantasy world, and a whole package arrives pre-assembled. The castles, the swords, the king on the stone chair, the blacksmith, the tavern with the sticky floor. Nobody decided any of that. It just showed up, because it's what fantasy looks like. And the moment you realize the age of your world got delivered to you the exact same way, the whole thing starts to feel a lot less like history and a lot more like a diorama nobody's ever thought to update. So let's pull it apart properly. Let's start with the thing the intro leaned on, because it's the part that surprises people the most, and everything else in this video is built on top of it. The real Middle Ages were not a frozen millennium. We've all absorbed this picture of the medieval world as one long grey stretch where a peasant was born in the mud, farmed the same mud their grandfather farmed, and died in it without a single new idea passing through the village. That picture is mostly a marketing job that got done on us centuries later, by people who wanted to flatter their own age. Because if you actually look at what changed between, say, the year 800 and the year 1400, it's genuinely staggering. Take one thread and follow it. A better plow shows up in Northern Europe, a heavy one that can turn the wet root-choked soil that the old scratch plows just skidded across. That's it, one tool. But now land that was worthless is suddenly farmland, and farmland grows surplus. And surplus means you don't need every single body in the field, which means some of those bodies can go do something else, become a miller, or set up shop as a merchant in town. Those people cluster and the cluster becomes a town, and the town needs law and coin and record keeping. And 300 years later, you've got universities and cathedrals and a merchant class arguing with kings. A single plow caused all of that. So much for a world holding still. That's a snowball rolling downhill, and the people living through it absolutely felt it move. They watched mechanical clocks appear on town halls and start slicing the day into hours that belonged to everyone. They watched a pair of ground glass lenses hand an aging craftsman the sight needed for years of close work he'd otherwise have lost. Watermills spread until a river stopped being just something you looked at on the way to town and became labor you never once had to feed. Now hold that against the thing we build. A fantasy world will hand you a map with an empire that fell 10,000 years before Chapter 1, ruins older than the gods, a line of kings so long nobody can recite it. And then it'll drop those kings into the exact same plate armor, swinging the exact same longsword the founder swung 10,000 years earlier, in a hole lit by torches nobody ever thought to improve. Real history couldn't sit still for 600 years. We routinely ask a reader to believe a world sat still for 10,000. And I want you to feel how big that gap actually is, because it's the whole point. That gap is the whole ballgame. It's the difference between a world that's alive and one that's been embalmed. To see why it matters that much, you have to understand what change actually is. Not the movie version where progress is a clean arrow pointing up and to the right, but the real mechanism, the thing that makes a society move at all. And this is the one spot in the whole video where I'm going to name a specific person, because he just won the biggest prize his field has for answering this exact question. The economist Joel Mokyr took the 2025 Nobel in economics, shared with two others, for explaining what actually drives innovation-driven growth, why some societies take off and keep climbing, and why others, just as clever, simply don't. And his answer is quietly perfect for anyone building a world. He splits invention into two kinds. There's the giant one, like the printing press or the steam engine, the kind of breakthrough that cracks open a whole new category of possible. And then there's the 1,000 small ones that come after it, the tiny refinements like a cheaper way to cast the type, or an ink that dries fast enough to let you print twice as much in a day. Mokyr's argument is that the giant invention on its own is almost inert. Gutenberg's press was a miracle, but a miracle that just sits there until the small refinements pile up underneath it and turn it from a curiosity into an industry. And those small refinements only keep coming when a society understands why the thing works, not just that it happened to work this once. Understanding is what lets the next person improve it instead of merely copying it. You can hand a society a finished working machine and watch them run it for 300 years exactly as delivered without ever nudging it forward an inch because they only ever learned the that and never the why. They got a gift. What they didn't get was the gift for making the next gift. That's the whole difference between a world with a museum full of ancient marvels nobody can replicate anymore, and a world that's still inventing. And it's a difference a writer gets to decide on purpose. Think hard about what that means for a world. Progress isn't a switch somebody flips. It's that snowball again. One idea makes the next idea thinkable, and that idea makes two more affordable. And the whole mass gathers speed as it rolls, as long as people keep asking why. Which finally gives us our measuring stick, the standard we're going to hold every fantasy world up against for the rest of this. A living world drifts, not necessarily fast and not necessarily towards some gleaming future, but it drifts. The tools change, the fashions change. And the big one, the balance of who holds the power, that changes too, because knowledge refuses to sit politely in a drawer. It leaks out into the world and picks up mass as it goes. So when a world hasn't drifted at all across a span of time that dwarfs everything human beings have ever actually written down, that is not the neutral, natural resting state of things. That's a snowball that somehow rolled for 10,000 years without picking up a single flake. Something is holding it in place. And the only question, the question this entire video turns on, is whether the writer chose the thing holding it or never noticed it needed holding at all. So let's put a real number on all of this, because 3,000 years is exactly the kind of figure your eye just slides straight across. So don't picture the number, picture the distance. 3,000 years is a longer stretch than the one that separates you from the founding of Rome. Everything you can name off the top of your head. Classical Greece, the Caesars, the fall of the empire, the actual medieval centuries we just walked through. The Renaissance, gunpowder, the printing press, steam, electricity, the phone in your hand, the entire run of Western history fits comfortably inside 3,000 years with room left over. That's the span a fantasy world will toss out in a single line of backstory. The empire has stood for 3,000 years. And in the very next breath, it'll tell you the empire still fights with cavalry and crossbows and still can't move a message faster than a rider can gallop it. Every single thing that happened to us across that window, none of it happened to them. That's not an ancient world so much as a photograph somebody left running for 3,000 years and then called a film. So why do we do it? Why does almost every one of us, the first time out, build a world that's secretly a museum? And the honest answer isn't stupidity and it isn't laziness. It's inheritance. Fantasy as a genre grew up in the shadow of one enormous, gorgeous, deeply medieval-feeling world. And then 1,000 writers grew up loving that world and grabbed the same set of parts without ever asking why those parts were there. The medieval look came bundled with the genre, and the deep age came bundled with the look, because old reads as serious. A world with 10,000 years of history behind it feels weighty and important, like it means something. So we pile the millennia on the way you drag a filter across a photo to age it. And then we never once notice that we've aged the frame without aging a single thing inside it. And when somebody does poke at it, the genre keeps a ready-made defense sitting right there in easy reach, the one you've heard 100 times. Magic replaces technology. Why would this world bother inventing the steam engine when a wizard can already move the train? Why chase gunpowder when a battle mage does the work of an artillery battery on his own? It sounds completely airtight, and I want to be fair to it, because there's a real sharp idea buried inside it, and we're going to come back and build that idea into something that actually holds. But the way most people say it, it isn't an argument at all, it's a reflex. Because almost nobody who reaches for that line has ever done the math on the wizard. Nobody's asked how many wizards a country actually has, what one costs, who can afford to hire one, and what the other 99% of the population does on all the days no wizard shows up. Magic replaces technology explains nothing at all about why a world froze. It's just the phrase we reach for, so we never actually have to think about it. And that's the real trouble with the eternal Middle Ages. It was never that it's unrealistic. It's that it's unconsidered, the one corner of the world the writer never actually made a decision about. And honestly, if you've ever felt that precise thing, that your own map has this vast impressive history that turns straight to fog the second somebody asks you one pointed question about it, that's not a personal failing. That's the single most common world-building problem there is. Somebody reads your map, clocks the empire that's ruled for 8,000 unbroken years, and asks the simplest question on Earth. Okay, so in 8,000 years, what stopped literally anyone from building a bigger army or a better weapon or a smarter kind of state? and just taking the whole thing. And you open your mouth and nothing comes out. Because you never built an answer, because the 8,000 years was always a mood you were going for, and never a mechanism you actually made work. It's the reason I put together a free thing called the Fantasy Writing Remedies. It's a library of 40 named writing problems, each one paired with the fix for it, sorted across 7 categories, no sign up, sitting in the description right now. This whole medieval stasis knot I'm untangling is really just one entry in that library pulled out and stretched into a video. If the way I'm working through it is useful, the other 39 are waiting for you down there. Okay, we've named the crime and we've named the motive. Now for the part that actually matters, the part the pure complaint videos never bother to reach, because a frozen world is not automatically a broken world. Stillness can be completely rigorously earned. The problem was never that your world is old and hasn't moved. The problem is only ever whether you built a reason for it or just quietly hoped nobody would look too closely. So let's build the reasons. There's a small countable set of them that actually survive pressure. And I'm going to walk you from the strongest one up to the most beautiful one. And that last one is running quietly underneath the single most famous fantasy world ever written, so stay with me for it. Start with the strongest because it's the one almost nobody uses and it barely has a weak spot. Call it the trap of good enough. It comes straight out of economic history, out of the long argument over why China, which for centuries was the most technologically advanced civilization on the planet, well ahead of Europe, never had its own industrial revolution. Historians still argue it out, but one of the leading answers is brutal in its simplicity. China got too good at doing things the old way. Labor was cheap and everywhere, the farming was extraordinarily refined, the canals and trade routes hummed along, and everyone who mattered was comfortable. In a world like that, there's simply no reason to gamble on a machine. Why would you sink a fortune into some clanking, unproven contraption to do a job that 10 workers already do cheaply and well? Economists actually have a name for a rich, sophisticated society that has rationally concluded it has no reason left to change. They call it a high-level equilibrium trap, which is a technical way of saying the world got stuck at the top of a hill instead of the bottom of one. It isn't poor or primitive, and it isn't in any kind of crisis. It's just so comfortable inside its own competence that changing anything would feel like a step down. Now watch what happens when you hand that idea to magic. This is where magic replaces technology, finally turns into a real argument instead of a reflex. Because now you do the math, the reflex skips right over. Say healing magic exists in your world, and it's genuinely good, and there are enough healers that a wealthy city can lean on them. Ask what just happened to the incentive to understand disease. It's gone. Nobody is ever going to fund the boring, thankless, decades-long grind of working out germ theory when the temple healer fixes the problem this same afternoon for the people who count. The magic did more than stand in for the technology. It quietly murdered the reason anyone would ever develop that technology in the first place. And it did that permanently. And that is a freeze you can defend for 10,000 years without blinking, as long as you follow it honestly. Which means being clear-eyed that the magic serves the people at the top and the people at the bottom. The ones no healer ever visits are living in a far darker and more desperate world than the postcard is showing you. Do that, and your stasis stops being background texture. It turns into an argument about who your world is actually for. And it works for any magic that's genuinely useful, not just the healing kind. Give a world cheap teleportation circles running between its great cities. Then ask why anyone in it would ever fund a road or a faster ship. They wouldn't. So the roads stay rutted and the hinterland stays cut off. And 1,000 years on, that world still crawls its armies across the map at a walking pace everywhere the circles don't happen to reach. Give it golems that never tire and never complain. And watch the incentive to invent a single labor-saving machine simply evaporate. Because the labor is already free, and it already obeys. Every version of this is the exact same move underneath. The magic quietly deletes a reason the world would otherwise have had to grow. And that deletion, followed honestly, is worth more to your world building than any amount of invented history. There's a quieter cousin to that mechanism as well though. And it's pure geography, which I love because it costs you almost nothing and it's sitting in real history in plain sight. You see, an invention is worthless if it can't travel. It does not matter that a clever farmer in the far south worked out a better plow if the mountains and the desert and the pirate-choked strait mean the idea never once reaches the far north. Real progress never depended only on smart people having ideas. It depended just as much on those ideas being able to move, to collide with other ideas, to spread and breed and combine. So a world of scattered islands or a continent chopped into sealed-off pockets by terrain nobody can easily cross will stay frozen for reasons that have nothing to do with anyone banning anything. Knowledge simply can't climb out of the valley it was born in. Every region keeps reinventing the same wheel, badly, and not one of them ever hears that the next valley over already built a better one 4 centuries ago. It's the same reason an island culture can stay recognizably itself for an astonishingly long stretch, while the mainland right across the water churns through empire after empire. Cross that water easily and often, and you're just another province absorbing everyone else's ideas. Make the crossing genuinely hard, and you become a world unto yourself, running on your own private clock, centuries behind or centuries ahead and nobody the wiser. You want a plausible stasis for almost no cost at all? Make your world genuinely hard to cross. The map does the work for you, and every isolated pocket becomes its own strange little snow globe. Now, that's the strong material, the structural reasons a world never even begins to move. But most writers don't reach for those. They reach for 2 other explanations, and both are shakier than they look. So let me show you exactly where each one cracks, and then how to actually rebuild it, because the rebuild is where the real world building hides. The first shaky one is the cataclysm. There was a great war, a fallen empire, or a magical apocalypse, and civilization got knocked all the way back down to swords and never climbed out again. It feels epic and writers reach for it constantly, but hold it up against what we know about how knowledge actually behaves. A single disaster, even a genuinely horrific one, does not erase understanding. The survivors remember. They remember that steel is possible, that the wheel exists, that an arch can hold up a roof. History's real dark ages usually weren't a full reset. The knowledge tended to survive even when the cities didn't, and the tools that came out the far side were often better than the ones that went in. So a single apocalypse 10,000 years back simply cannot hold a world down for 10,000 years. The snowball just starts rolling again the next generation. If you want a cataclysm that actually enforces a permanent freeze, it can't be an event. It has to be a cycle, something that comes back around every few centuries, right as a civilization has clawed its way up to the very threshold of real change. The reset arrives on schedule and flattens it again, a recurring culling. Maybe the magic itself is what triggers it, once a society leans on it a little too hard. Now you don't have a world that's merely old. You have a world that's trapped, condemned to run the same doomed lap forever, and that is a far more haunting thing to read about than a single ancient war ever was. The second shaky one is the ban. The church forbids it, the mage guild suppresses it, the god emperor outlawed progress 10,000 years ago. And the thing that breaks this one is time itself. Almost no human institution stays coherent and powerful and afraid of the same thing for 1,000 years, let alone 10. Think honestly about how few things on Earth have held their authority intact even across 2000. Enforcement simply rots eventually. The zealots die and their grandchildren get comfortable and lazy and start bending the rule for a bribe. A ban that depends on hundreds of straight generations all staying equally scared and equally obedient is close to the least believable thing you could put in a world. So if you want a suppressor that genuinely works, it can't be a dusty old law that everyone somehow just keeps obeying out of pure habit. It needs muscle, and it needs a motive of its own. Picture a living power that actively profits from the freeze. Something that gains a concrete, renewable prize every single year the world stays exactly where it is. And that has the reach and the eyes to notice the moment somebody starts tinkering toward change. You want a living predator with a personal stake in the stillness. Something a good deal hungrier than an old law nobody reads anymore. Make the thing enforcing your stasis genuinely wanted, badly, for reasons that are all its own. And 10,000 years of that stops being a plot hole and becomes the scariest thing on the map. And look, if this is the exact part of world building you want to get genuinely good at, the part where every one of these choices connects to the next one instead of sitting off by itself in a corner, that's the whole reason I built the world building system. It's an A to Z system, 10 modules and more than 60 lessons, that walks you from a blank page all the way to a story-ready world Bible. It's on Founder pre-order right now, delivering in August of 2026, and the Founder pricing closes the day it launches. If a video on one narrow slice of this is landing for you, that course is the deep version of the entire thing. You can find out more via the link down in the description. Now let me bring up the most beautiful reason of all, the one I promised you, the mechanism running quietly underneath the most famous fantasy world ever written. Because when people say fantasy is stuck in the past, the very first example they reach for is always Tolkien. And they've got it exactly backwards. Middle-earth is not frozen. Middle-earth is dying. The entire emotional engine of that world is decline, a long and gorgeous and grief-soaked slide down out of a greater age that has already ended before the story even begins. The elves are leaving. The magic is thinning out of the world year by year. The truly great works are all spoken of in the past tense, and nearly everything the characters love is a little smaller and a little more worn than it was in their grandparents' time. Tolkien didn't build a world that was standing still. He built a world caught in the middle of losing something enormous, and then he made that loss the entire point. And that is the exact secret every imitator missed. They copied the ancient ruins and the fallen empires because the ruins looked impressive, and they threw away the one thing that made those ruins mean anything at all. The ache of a world that's still moving, just moving downward. A declining world is still a changing world. It's moving sometimes as dramatically as any world racing toward the future, just moving in the direction of less. A reader feels that difference the instant they step into it, because a dying world has genuine stakes, and a frozen one is only ever a very detailed picture of a place. So that's your toolkit. A world can hold still because it's grown too comfortable to bother changing, or because its geography won't let a single idea travel, or because a cycle keeps grinding it back down, or because a living power holds it there on purpose, or because it isn't actually still at all, but slowly and deliberately dying. 5 earned reasons, and you'll notice not one of them is bolt a steam engine onto the side of it. Because the fix for a badly frozen world was never to shovel in more technology. The fix was always just to add a reason, which is really what this entire video has been circling. And it's finally time to just name the actual principle, because it's smaller and far more portable than everything I've just poured on you. Every world we've talked about, the broken ones and the great ones alike, comes down to one single fork in the road. There are writers who inherit their world's age, and there are writers who choose it. And I want to be genuinely unironically kind to the first group, because I lived there for years, and it usually means the opposite of a bad writer. Someone who loved this genre enough to soak up all its defaults long before they ever thought to question a single one of them. And honestly, execution matters more than realism here anyway. A world that's frozen on purpose and thought all the way through will beat a realistic one that feels fussy and false every single time. The goal was never to make your fantasy pass a history exam. Most readers of this genre wouldn't want to read that book. The goal is just the one word we started on. Decide. Pick your world's tech level on purpose. How far it's come, how long it's been sitting there, and above everything else why. And then follow that one decision out into every corner it would ever reach. That's the whole craft of it, right there. If you decide that cheap magic is what froze your world's progress, then chase that decision all the way down into who actually holds the magic, who doesn't, what the lives of the have-nots really look like at street level, and what all of that does to the politics at the top. If you decide geography is the thing that trapped it, then let the map bend the wars and the trade routes and the accents and the food. One deliberate choice about how your world became what it is, honored faithfully in every place it would touch. Make that choice and build it all the way out, and your 10,000-year-old empire stops being a photograph and becomes a place, a specific one that could only ever have turned out the single way it did, for reasons a reader can feel in their chest, even when they couldn't quite put a name to a single one of them. And if you want proof this isn't just a nice theory, proof that a fantasy world can genuinely move and still feel every inch like fantasy, the best writers in the genre have been quietly showing us how for decades. Terry Pratchett spent 30 years doing the thing everyone assumed you couldn't do. He let Discworld actually progress. Right there on the page, book after book after book. A printing press arrives and the city gets its first newspaper, and you get to watch exactly what a free press does to a place that has never once had one. The Clacks network, the semaphore towers that are the closest thing that world has to the internet, becomes the stage for a scrappy little startup getting swallowed whole by a ruthless corporation. And it feels as bitterly modern as anything in the news. Then eventually, the railways come. And the trick, the thing that makes all of it sing, is that no invention ever just appears on its own. Each one lands in a world already reshaped by the last one, and then goes on to reshape the next. That is a living setting, and it is beloved by millions precisely because you can feel it breathing. Brandon Sanderson runs a harder version of the same play. His Mistborn world takes a flat 300-year jump between its first arc and its second, and when you walk back into it, the people have guns and electric lights and cameras, and the old magic from 3 centuries earlier is still humming along right beside the new machinery, neither one cancelling the other out. And then there's the whole subgenre of flintlock fantasy, which exists for this exact reason. Writers like Django Wexler deliberately marched their worlds up out of the medieval fog and into the age of muskets and revolutions, because the second a world is finally allowed to change, it starts handing you conflicts the eternal Middle Ages simply cannot. Wexler made the point himself once: leave that basic medieval milieu behind, and you can't just crib from Tolkien anymore. So go back to that map, the one with the empire that stood unchanging for 10,000 years. Don't age it down, and for the love of everything, don't bolt a factory onto it. Just ask it the one question that will either save it or sink it. Why hasn't this changed? If you already have a real answer, a trap of comfort, a wall of mountains, a returning cataclysm, a hungry predator, a long slow defeat, then that vast age is suddenly the most powerful thing in your entire story, and you've earned every single year of it. And if you don't have an answer yet, that isn't a failure at all. That's just the best afternoon of world building you're going to get all month, sitting right there on the desk, waiting for you to show up. But before you run off to build all that out, one warning, because I can already hear the trap springing. The second you've got your reason, you'll want to chase it into every last corner of the map, every village, every forgotten little god. Don't. The best world builders I know are strategically gloriously lazy. They pour everything into the tiny slice of the world the story actually touches, and they fake all the rest so well you'd never once catch them at it. How they decide what to fake and what to build for real is the whole trick, and it's the video sitting on screen right now. Go watch that one before you open your world Bible again.